The Last Duel was one of my most anticipated films of the year as a big fan of historical dramas and medieval epics, and a fan of Ridley Scott, the director of my favorite film of all time, Blade Runner. He has not directed anything since All the Money in the World in 2017, and this man is 83 years old and has this coming out this year and House of Gucci in November. I think we're going to get very sick of hearing his name at the Oscars, but he's still got it. This is just a monster of a film, and it was a huge surprise. I mean, even as someone who was really excited for this, I was not expecting it to be this epic and to become my favorite film of the year so far. What about me? Just between the writing, the directing, the story, and the surprising sense of humor that this film has. And it's not absolutely perfect, and I'll get into that later, but I think it's just something that needs to be seen. I think it needs to be seen on the big screen, and it's not going to be for everyone. Some people might find it in bad taste how explicit it is with its subject matter. Some people are going to walk out. I know I saw a few people walk out of my theater, but it's something that if it works for you, you're going to be thinking about it for a long time. I did want to add a note about the subject matter before I get into the review. I was feeling pretty shaken up after I saw it because it has some really graphic and upsetting scenes of sexual assault. So fair warning if that's not something that you're comfortable with. This is obviously being discussed as the #MeToo era movie, which, I don't know, it's so funny to me. There are headlines that are saying, like, The Last Duel, medieval tale, shockingly relevant. But this is about so much more than sexual assault. It's about internalized misogyny and male pride and vanity and misconceptions about female sexuality. It would be difficult to overemphasize the impact that this film had on me, but I don't want to raise expectations too much. I know it's going to resonate different with everyone. So I'm just going to talk about it. I'm going to summarize the film, talk about some characters and performances, and then I'll get into the really interesting story structure that made this film so great. And if you want to truly go in blind, that's what I did. Definitely click away and come back and let me know what you thought of the film. I'm not going to be talking about anything that can be found in the online summary or the trailer, but I am going to be getting into detail. The Last Duel is based off of the true story of Marguerite de Carouge, a woman who was raped by a man that she knew in her brave decision to seek justice for what happened to her. It takes place in 14th century France. Jodie Comer's Marguerite is married to Matt Damon's Jean. Events transpire, and Jean's ex-friend Jacques, played by Adam Driver, is the one being accused. Back then, everything was, of course, answered with brutal death, and the king, who's played by a very charmingly sadistic Alex Lawther, orders that they have a joust to the death. I will also discuss Ben Affleck's Pierre, the Chad of medieval France, later on. So Matt Damon's Jean is this prideful and talented warrior who's actually a little bit of a dweeb. He's become the laughingstock amongst his peers, delivering these self-serious speeches that in another film might be presented as powerful, but all you feel is secondhand embarrassment for him, especially when he's belittled by Adam Driver's character, who used to have great respect for him. They used to be friends, but he's become buddy-buddy with Ben Affleck's Pierre and now takes part in the teasing and the bullying. So he essentially plays the role of Katie in Mean Girls, and Pierre is Regina George. Jacques is known as an intellectual, although women think that he's handsome, but he's developed this reputation of being a womanizer after he became Pierre's right-hand man. And we get a look at this when we see their lives behind closed doors. Their free time is unsurprisingly filled with drinking and orgies and adultery. It all plays out so much like a cliquey high school drama. You feel like you're floating through the kingdom looking at all these people's dirty secrets. People will say Marguerite is too smart for Jean, she called Jacques handsome, and all this gossip informs the way that they perceive her claim when she comes forward. And Jodie Comer is unspeakably brilliant here. I think the fact that she's a lesser known actress made this even more believable, but make no mistake, she did more than hold her own against Driver, Damon, and Affleck. She is easily the standout of the film. Great performances all around, but the way that she portrayed that pain of being strong and the depression and detachment that follows an event like this was very powerful. If she doesn't get at least a nod at the Oscars, there will be words. Ben Affleck's performance was great as well, but I'm going to take a sad stance and say that I wasn't blown away by it. He's got this bleached hair and shiny robes, absolutely the Chad of the film, and he plays this role with so much charisma. He's that comic relief that stands out, like Robert Pattinson in The King, or I think of one of my favorites, Aaron Taylor Johnson in Outlaw King. But I didn't walk out of the film thinking about his performance. His role is actually a lot smaller than I thought it would be based on how much people have been discussing it. Now, what sets this film apart from others in this genre, besides the subject matter, is this really interesting story structure. And this was written by Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, which is so shocking to me. I mean, they've done this before with Good Will Hunting, but they haven't written anything together since. And now I'm just thinking of everything that we've missed out on over the last 20 years. The film is told in 3 chapters, each retelling the story from a different character's perspective. So we get to see the events as Matt Damon's Jean would retell them, Marguerite's husband, and then from Adam Driver's perspective as the one being accused, and then finally from Marguerite's perspective. And the retelling doesn't feel redundant. It's this gradual unraveling of the truth where scenes are shot exactly the same with very, very subtle differences in the acting, and each character will interpret a situation completely differently. An interaction that Marguerite thought was completely neutral, Jacques will see as flirty. Jean will be abusive, but he sees it as being noble and protective. It even applies to when the 2 men interact with each other. They see it differently, who extended their hand first to make amends, who's the bigger man. It's just really fascinating to discover what these characters are really thinking and perceiving and what is the truth. They also had enough self-awareness to bring in Nicole Holofcener, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, to write for Marguerite, and I think that was a great decision. I think that her chapter was probably the most impactful, with Adam Driver's definitely being the most unsettling, and Matt Damon's mostly being expositional. And this will be compared to Rashomon Until the Cows Come Home, Akira Kurosawa's film that essentially invented this method of multiple perspective storytelling, showing how the truth can be skewed and basically how humans lie for self-preservation. But the big difference here is that they did not leave any ambiguity as to what happened. And I think that that was a really important decision to kind of reinforce that message about sexual assault. There's a really cool little nod right before Marguerite's chapter that shows that they're very clear about what they're saying, but I do think they found that sweet spot of being very effective without being preachy. And so that's where the strength of this movie lies, in its use of that perspective structure, not to justify anything or make anything ambiguous, but to make tangible what happens when men think that they have the right to women's bodies and when they view the world through the lens of their own pride and vanity. One complaint people will have is that there's a lot of focus on the men in this film, and I think adding more dimension to the male characters allowed them to explore those patriarchal systems that are behind all of this, when just showing Marguerite's perspective might have been something that we've already seen. It gives this added context for Jean and Jacques' hyper-masculine personas and how ego and insecurity can grow to a point that they're borderline delusional in how they perceive situations. To quote Rashomon, it's because men are weak that they lie, even to themselves. The way they altered that original story structure to fit the themes of this film, I think is really genius. And the women aren't innocent either. There are women here who uphold these structures and don't believe Marguerite or encourage her to be silent. The result is this epic medieval feminist behemoth of a story that explores just about every facet of how we deal with sexual assault as a society. I found it very validating as a woman and very well handled, as well as technically brilliant, and that's all Ridley Scott's direction. But to be honest with you, I can't talk specifics because I was too swept up in the film to notice. When we get to the final battle, there's just so much riding on the outcome. I was white-knuckled, edge of my seat. I think it was executed perfectly, and it was very brutal. There's this signature brutality that comes from a lot of Ridley Scott's films that I think added a really great contrast between who these men were at home and kind of this violent persona that comes out on the battlefield. It doesn't end on a very powerful note, but it wraps up in a satisfying way and still leaves you with so much to think about. The only real issue that I had with the film is that the first act is pretty slow. It starts off with a bang, and then once we get into Jean's chapter, there's a lot of info being thrown at you in this medieval dialect, so it was definitely a bit of a struggle for probably the first 30-35 minutes. But from there, I was completely swept up in the film. Not that there aren't little issues here and there, but to me, this was a film that impacted me in a really profound way just as a whole. So because of the slow first act, I'm going to give The Last Duel 4.5 stars. I really wanted to do this film justice, but there's just so much to talk about, so I hope I did at least an okay job communicating some of those themes that resonated so much with me, and encouraged anyone who hasn't seen it to check it out, because there wasn't a huge marketing campaign for this one, and I think it's a really important film. I'm very excited to see this film again. I'm really hoping that it holds up on a second watch, because it did instantly become my favorite film of the year so far. Let me know what your favorite film of the year is so far, and if you've seen The Last Duel, let me know what you thought. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and go over and find me on Twitter and Letterboxd, and keep an eye out for more videos soon. Thanks for watching, guys.